Well, hello everyone. It's my enormous pleasure to introduce our new podcast, Time to Shine, where we're going to talk all things Shining Time Station. My name is Adrian. I'm also known as Northern Star on Twitter, and I am not joined alone. I have my lovely co-host Mike here with me.
Hello everybody, it is Mike. You may know me as the Buried Truck on Twitter. I am so excited to be doing this podcast. I'm honored that I get to do it with Adrian, first of all, but the fact that we get to talk about a show that is so near and dear to our heart is just all the more better. So I'm very excited to dive into this.
Likewise. For those of you who don't know, I have another little podcast called Train of Thought that I've been doing, and when I finally got the invite to do this, I was so excited because talking about Shining Time Station is just, such a passion of mine, and the show meant a lot to me as a kid. So yeah, great to be here, Mike.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like people are always aware of Shining Time Station, but I feel like especially as time has gone on and maybe as it's faded from the memory of the public, it kind of gets overlooked in the grand scheme of the Thomas franchise and the Thomas universe. So I think this is going to shed some new light for sure.
I hope so, because it's really disservice to the show when you think about, it was pulling in just over 7 million viewers at its height, and now people don't really even recall it. And I think maybe part of that might be the fact that, they stopped broadcasting it around, I think, 2000.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, it was a part of people's lives and they recall it when it's mentioned, but it's more distant, and Thomas is still so much more prevalent. So I hope that we can reinvigorate the Shining Time passion and just get that out there.
Exactly. Now, I'm curious, Adrian, what's your earliest memory of Shining Time Station, and what did it mean to you growing up?
It's a hard one because I often go back and forth and I say, did I watch a Thomas VHS first and then Shining Time Station? Mm-hmm. But I'm pretty sure, I got into Thomas first, and my earliest memory of Shining Time is basically through my grandma. So I remember being out front of her house near the garden and her saying, there's this new show that has Thomas stories in it. And, I think the first thing she said was there was a jukebox band of little puppets playing, cowboy songs. And as a kid, I was like, okay. And I think that's one of the first things she told me. And I mean, obviously I was pretty into Thomas at that point. I think I'd watched the Thomas Gets Tricked and the James Learns a Lesson VHSs and rented those. So I was a pretty big fan. And so she started recording the second season for me as it was coming out in 91, I believe. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was an instant connection. It was kind of love at first sight. And I have a vague memory of coming back to my childhood farm and having either that show in my mind or watching it for the first time around then. And it just flowed so well. And I just became obsessed with it to the point that, it's hard to remember exactly how that unfolded, but it just became a fixture in my life. And I really loved the station component. I know a lot of folks sort of say, I watched Shining Time for the Thomas stories, and I found the in-person component not as compelling. But for me, it drew me in. It felt real. It felt nostalgic. It felt lived in, and it just was this sort of welcoming platform, for the Thomas stories. But I think also took on this on a life of its own because I knew the Thomas stories already, and sometimes I would even fast forward them if I knew them really well and watch the station kind of sitcom element. So I think that part of the show is underrated. As much as the show is a vehicle for Thomas, it also really had a spirit of its own. It made this sort of railroad lore world for people to engage in, and for kids to get nostalgic about railroads again in a very, a very real way. I don't know about you, Mike, but it always felt like a real station to me. As a kid.
Everything about it felt real to me. I'm pretty sure this is the thing. My earliest conscious memory, Thomas has always been in my life. I can't remember a time where I was, aware of my surroundings and I wasn't totally into the show as well. And Thomas itself, obviously, with the amount of work that went into designing the sets and bringing the world to life, it didn't feel like it was a model train show. I thought as a kid that the island of Sodor was a real place and that these were real steam engines that people just happened to be filming. And,
absolutely.
But that also extends to Shining Time Station itself, because it just felt like it was such a... It didn't have the... as much as there is comedy in it, with Schemer and, the secondary characters like the mayor and Midge Smoot and all that, unlike a lot of the other kids shows at the time, it didn't feel like it was a goofy world per se. It felt like these were all... It felt like you knew someone like all of those people in your life, and that just made it so much more real. And, as you say, I mean, Thomas really was the main draw. Let's not, we won't sugarcoat it. It was a vehicle for Thomas to be broken into North America. But definitely. At the same time, the station segments were so entertaining, and... I mentioned Schemer. He was always such a source of comedy. As a kid, I wanted to be an engineer like Billy Two Feathers. I absolutely did. I thought he was the coolest. They were all so fun. All these characters have such good qualities to them. So, it's such a wonderful show. And I think if people don't really pay attention to it, I think they're going to be missing out on a lot of cool things. Obviously it's, the history of what it meant for Thomas outside of the UK aside, the show itself does stand on its own two legs, because it was just so wonderfully done, and Britt and Rick really, you can tell how much heart and soul they put into it, and that goes for everybody else who worked on it. It was definitely a passion show.
I completely agree. And I remember when I was chatting with Rick and he said, you have these shows sometimes once in a lifetime where all the right players align. Yes. And you have people that are the best in all their different areas, whether it be puppetry, lighting, set design, acting. And he said this was one of those rare times where that just all came together and it worked.
Totally.
I really like too what you said about the characters being relatable, because I felt like I could just be in that world as one of the children, and the children felt like, they could be kids at school or something. And I believed it. I know people looking at the show now will say, oh, I notice there aren't actually that many passengers going through Shining Time Station, as the sort of story is progressing. And as a kid, I never noticed that.
Me neither.
Oddly, I just believed that this was a station, that it was a real historic old place, and that their struggle to keep the station alive and keep it from the threat of being closed by JB King. It all I didn't question it, but so it's interesting to look back and have people note those things now. But I think as kids, you don't necessarily think the same way, and when you have a world that feels believable, it's just like, okay, there we go.
Exactly. And you know what? It's funny that you say that, because I think now of the episodes where they did have a lot of passengers in the station, and it's kind of like, whoa, this is a bit of an overload, and you're almost relieved when the station kind of clears and you're left with the familiar faces of, Stacy, Billy, the kids, Mr. C.
I agree.
So it's interesting, because that I'd never thought about that until you said it.
No, it's funny. And oddly, I think sometimes I do find the passengers a bit distracting. And I think because in the first season, I think it was probably the most minimalist in that respect. And I seem to remember more in seasons 2, and I think especially 3, there being more crowds and throngs going through, and people engaging with the passengers more. I think I seem to remember season 1, there would be a lot of sort of one-off passengers that would have something to do with the plot of the story, like a key element. And then I think they kind of amped things up a bit later, but correct me if I'm wrong, but that's just sort of the...
No, you're 100% on the money. And that's kind of the funny thing. It's interesting that we're going to be talking about season 1 episodes today too, because when I was growing up, I think, because I was born in 1992, so by that point, season 2 had ended. They were, I think, just about to start with season 3 pretty soon. And I think at that point, they had kind of phased the season 1 episodes out of syndication, because I don't have any memory of season 1 from a kid, except for, obviously, the Christmas special, because we had that on VHS.
Of course.
But I remember when it was a couple years ago, and I was just on YouTube wanting to find some of the old episodes that I hadn't seen in a while, and I stumbled across a playlist of the season 1 episodes, And it was like rediscovering the show all over again because none of them were familiar to me. I had never seen Ringo as Mr. Conductor outside of that one VHS.
Yeah.
I didn't know who Harry was. Like, it was such an interesting thing to go back to, not as a child, but as someone who grew up with a different part of the show. Yeah. And being able to see that contrast. And you're absolutely right. Like, viewing those episodes, they didn't focus on the station being as busy per se. It was like, if you did have passengers, they kind of went out of their way to make them like memorable one-off passengers too.
Exactly. So how old were you when you saw season 1 for the first time then?
Oh God, I was, when was that? Oh my gosh.
not to like challenge your
I know. I should be remembering this much easier, but I want to say it wasn't until I was like 26 or 27.
That's amazing.
Yeah, like and I was like, I've got to remember some of this surely. Watched through the whole season, none of it was familiar, but it was like when I got to the end, I was just so enthralled, and there was definitely a lot of binge watching of season 1 because I was just so taken with it.
Good. I'm glad to hear that, because I know, again, these are just rumblings I've heard, but sometimes people are like, well, season 1, the show's hitting its stride. But for me, like you, you started with season 2, right? You said? Season 3.
I think I technically would have started with season 3.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so I started with season 2 as it was being aired and watched all those episodes. And then season 1 was on YTV. Mm-hmm. It must have been the in-between. So it must have been around 92 when it was in between the second and third seasons.
Yeah.
And my grandma recorded all of those as well. I mean, she recorded the entire series for me, but I remember coming to season 1, having watched season 2, and I loved it. It felt like I can't describe it, but I remember going back to my season 1 tapes a lot for the nurturing, for seeing the start of the episode. And that's it's a good, I think, lead into us talking about the first episode of this series, which is A Place Unlike Any Other, because that's when I got to see, I'm like, oh, the station is covered in cobwebs. Mm-hmm. Oh, but I've seen it already. Mm-hmm. And I think my mind had to sort of jog back and be like, okay, and these are different kids. And then, I watched that whole season, and then I think season 3 came out, and then I watched that with new Thomas stories, which was exciting. But yeah, I can't say enough about season 1, and we could talk all day, but I think let's get into the first episode. We thought that would be a really great place to start the podcast.
Absolutely.
And also, it's one of my favorite episodes of the season. And I know often in TV shows, you don't get that. Often the first episode or two, they're kind of hitting their stride. Actors are developing the characters, but it initially felt like home for me. So I'll just give a brief summary of the episode for everyone. If you haven't seen it, I'd highly recommend checking it out.
Where should we begin? Let's begin with the painting. Oh, it's a beauty, isn't it?
The episode begins with the magical Mr. Conductor vanishing into a cloud of gold dust as the lovely Stacey Jones introduces an old railroad station called, of course, Shining Time Station, to her nephew Matt. So Stacey shows him around, talks about her plans to restore the station to its former glory, when her grandmother actually used to be the station manager, and then this is a role that Stacey will now fill. Matt then plays a song on the jukebox, and we get to meet the lovely jukebox band Puppets for the first time. Oh my God, their names. Tex, Rex, Dee Dee, Tito, and Grace. And then while cleaning, Matt meets the magical Mr. Conductor for the first time, who surprises him and then tells him his first Thomas story, which is Thomas Gets Tricked. Then a railroad engineer, Harry Cupper, arrives with his granddaughter Tanya to look at the station and decide if he would like to work there as an engineer full-time. Stacey then introduces Harry to his new workshop, and after Matt gets a little bit startled by Harry, Mr. C appears again and tells another introductory Thomas story. Edward helps out. And finally, Harry decides to stay, much to everyone's joy and excitement, and concludes that there's just something about this place.
The famous line.
Which becomes somewhat of a catchphrase that kind of persists. And it's funny because I recently rewatched the Becky Makes a Wish episode where Schemer as Stacy parodies that line. And I think, oh God, it really stayed throughout the series. I love that they keep coming back to it.
I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I'm very excited for when we eventually get to Becky Makes a Wish because it's just one of the most comedic episodes ever.
Oh, it's so good, and it's so great learning too that's one of Dee Dee and Brian's favorite. They just had such a blast. I think they also nailed each other's characters, but save that for a future episode.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so just initial impressions for me. I think it's a great series premiere. It really gives everyone a lovely introduction to the station building itself and all the different parts of the station as she takes Matt through the information desk, ticket booth, the arcade, the waiting area, the workshop eventually with Harry. And so through all that exposition with her explaining it to Matt, us as the viewers, the kids, and now the nostalgia-seeking adults get to learn about all the different parts of the station, meet Mr. C, and then also being introduced to Thomas through those stories, and those stories being the first 2 episodes of Series 1 of Thomas the Tank Engine. So in terms of trivia, I was looking up a few little facts about the episode. So it's interesting. Speaking of the Thomas stories, in the credits, we see that they actually use the UK titles.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, which I didn't realize. And so either that means that they didn't update that in time, or maybe that Dr. Slaby was still working on the Americanizing piece. Because as a lot of you know, not only was Dr. Slaby as a series advisor in that he received each script, I believe it was each outline for an episode, and then each first draft would review that and then send it back to Rick Sigelko. But he also did that with the Thomas stories, right. changing all the different components. But I thought that was kind of funny.
That's interesting, because now I'm trying to think of the timeline of like Shining Time airing versus when the first standalone Thomas VHS came out in the US.
That's a good point, right? And I think the first one came out in 91 or 90.
I think 90, and that would make sense then, because 90, yeah. Season 1 of Shining Time was in 89.
Exactly, yeah.
Oh, so interesting.
Because this came out January 29th of 1989. So yeah, you're probably right. They're probably still in that process, and knowing that kids aren't going to look at something like that.
Right.
I also read that the first episode's title was debated over for a while. I don't know what the other suggestions were, but my guess is maybe they called it something about this place or something like that, and then landed on a place unlike any other.
Right.
We can only theorize.
Of course.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what are your kind of impressions of the first app, Mike?
Well, looking back on this episode and kind of rewatching it in anticipation of recording this, one thing I really like about it is, as you kind of noted there, how they go about introducing everything. Because I feel like with other kid shows, you would have got a very kind of in-your-face, like, hi, my name is Stacey Jones. This is my nephew, Matt. But they don't actually introduce each other. Like, they just show up in the station, and Stacey starts telling Matt about the station. And it's during those interactions where they're kind of, playing station master and passenger that you first learn their names.
Absolutely.
And kind of, there's not really much explanation needed to who they are. You can really figure it out on your own. And I think the same goes for when Mr. Conductor first shows up, too. Because you've got this magical little man and this kid who is startled by it, but never once does Matt ask, like, who or what are you? Like, how is this possible? It's just like, this is Mr. Conductor, and he travels everywhere doing railroad work, and now he's going to tell you a story about trains. There's no explanation of the logistics behind it. And I really like that, because it just leaves this mystery of, like, fill in the blanks, draw your own conclusions about what Mr. Conductor is. It's not going to be laid out and explained cut and dry to you.
I completely agree, and I think in line with that is that this show didn't feel like it played down to kids. I think what irks me about a lot of modern TV shows, or ones that I've seen in the last maybe 10, 15 years, is that, like you said, Mike, it's the kind of the patronizing, like, I'm Stacey Jones, I head the station, and this is my nephew Matt, and like, this is a magical man, and this is what happens. The fact that we just kind of hit the ground running, it really just trusts in kids' ability to make sense of a world in their own way. I think people really underestimate kids' intelligence a lot of the time, and I see this with a lot of the parents, as some of you know, my background is in psychotherapy. A lot of the parents that I work with, they'll say, I'm trying to protect my kids from this, or, I don't want them to hear this. And I'm saying, your kids are picking it all up. They know they can attune to things really fast. So in a similar fashion, I think a child watching this for the first time can just accept these things, even though they may seem extremely bizarre. Like you said, a little man who's like, I live in a single house. And, you'd think some people would be terrified by that today, but it just worked.
It does. And it works because, Shining Time Station is the least threatening place I can think of, really. I can't imagine any kid watching this show and not feeling like it's like getting a hug. It really is.
I love that.
It's just so safe. It's perfect. Yeah. So yeah, I completely agree. I think it's kind of funny because with the live action stuff, they kind of mirrored the Thomas format of just telling the story and letting the moral speak for itself. They aren't going to stop the show and explain things to you. Just follow along the storyline. You'll learn what you need to pick up.
Yeah, it works. It flows. It's just like you said. It's like a hug. It's warm. I will say, I noticed as a kid that the intensity of the storylines and the emotion of the characters does ramp up as we get kind of 3/4 of the way through series 1, and we'll come to that later. But I remember as a kid being shocked by, like, for example, Stacey yelling and getting, visibly tearful.
Oh, yeah.
But I think that works kind of naturally with the progression of the show. As we get to know the characters, kids start to feel safer. Then it's like, okay, we can go to these places where adults are dealing with more threatening situations, like the station closing, people losing their jobs, things like that.
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree. It's done in such a natural way that even when those less than positive emotions come up, it's not in a way that unsettles you or makes you feel like, oh, I'm kind of scared by this. Like it's very natural.
Exactly. So we're going to break down some of the different components of the episode. So first of all, we meet the jukebox band quite early on, and I loved the puppets as a kid. I know a lot of people... Okay, I'm glad to hear it, because a lot of people now are like, these puppets terrify me. I thought they were great and wacky and weird, and I loved the little set with the nickel coming down, and I don't know. Mike, back me up here.
I completely... Listen, there are far scarier puppets out there than the jukebox band. Let's just get that out in the open right now. The jukebox band is so... I love that each of them is such a distinct personality too. Like you can very easily recall who's who, what they were all about. Credit to the performers too, not like the puppeteers and also the vocalists who sang the songs, because they're all just so talented, and they made the puppets so expressive and really brought them to life.
Absolutely. And so, we had some folks, obviously as they were recording the puppet segments, they were voicing the characters at the same time, and then the songs had been pre-recorded beforehand, and some of the puppeteers did both the voice as well as the singing voice, such as Venice Thomas. She was on my first podcast. She's such a talent.
Oh, her voice is unbelievable,
isn't it? It's so good. It's so good. And she sings this first song, I've Been Working on the Railroad, which, I think it's a great start, because it's a classic railroad song. Everyone knows it. Kids can sing along or kind of bop along.
Oh, I've been working on the railroad all the livelong day. I've been working on the railroad just to pass the time away. Don't you hear the whistle blowing? Rise up so early in the morning. I did! Don't you hear the captain shouting? Dinah, blow your horn.
Who's Dinah?
Dinah, won't you blow? Dinah, won't you blow? Dinah, won't you blow your horn?
She's a horn player.
Dinah, won't you blow? Dinah, won't you blow? Dinah, won't you blow your horn?
Someone's in the kitchen with Dinah. Someone's in the kitchen, I know.
Ow!
Someone's in the kitchen with Dinah.
Strumming on the old banjo.
like you said, you get a flavor for each individual band member, and the fact that I didn't know this until recently, that each band member represents a different musical style. So we've got soul with Grace, we've got kind of the mod drummer with Dee Dee, we've got Tex and Rex for country, and then we've got Tito. I can't remember what Tito was actually.
Tito is more of like the swing jazz
right?
kind of guy.
Swing jazz. There we go. Yeah, so you kind of see that early on, and we also get a little bit of exposition from Dee Dee saying, like, not Dee Dee, our Dee Dee Khan, but Dee Dee the drummer, saying that, as Matt is peering in the machine, he can only hear them talking when they sing a song. So all the little, the little in-betweens they can't see, and he also can't see the puppets. So they remain this sort of shrouded mystery with this seemingly, I would say, omnipotent jukebox choosing when it wants to play and sometimes playing something different.
Yeah, it's such an interesting world. And the thing that I like about this song and how they've chosen this one for the introductory episode, which I don't think you really get with the remaining jukebox songs, is that as the song's happening, you're also getting little ad-libs from the other band members, which I really love. It's a great introduction to, okay, the Tex and Rex are kind of the humorous ones.
When they're like, who's Dinah?
Exactly, yes.
Like, Dinah, blow your horn? Yeah.
Yes, and then, Dee Dee's doing her little shouts in the back, like she's the wild one. Tito's the cool guy, and then Grace is just, the absolute soul singer of the band. And it's just, I love it. I think those little flares really make such a difference as opposed to if they just played the song straight through. Agreed.
And I know one other thing that Craig Marin said in his podcast was like, as the show progressed, our camera work got fancier and stuff, but I like the simplicity of the camera work in the first episode, because you only have that basic overarching shot of all of them, and then just focusing on individual characters, no fancy slides, anything, and it works.
It works so well. Yeah, I think it's they definitely got more adventurous with the camera in the following seasons, but again, kind of drawing parallels to the way that the Thomas episodes were filmed. Like series 1 has that very static camera, but it works.
That's a really good point. It
totally works.
Yeah, it does work. And just speaking of the Thomas stories, what do you think about the choice, for the first episode's stories?
I think it's pretty much a no-brainer that they would have gone with these episodes. I have to say, I really admire that for at least the first little bit of series 1 of Shining Time, they followed the sequential order of the stories. I think it kind of keeps it more in a neat line.
I agree.
But yeah, it's great that obviously it's kind of a given that they're going to start with Thomas's introductory episode. And then to go right into, obviously, let's build the world a little bit more. Here's another engine. His name is Edward. And, here's... It does a great job of establishing some very crucial key characters to the entire franchise.
Absolutely. And from what I understand from Rick, he sort of said, when we started off, we knew early on that Ringo would be a part of the show. He was probably the first cast, obviously, because he was the voice of Thomas.
For sure.
And then they built Shining Time Station around that. But I imagine, the storyboarding process for each episode, they'd kind of have an idea of which Thomas episodes they were going to incorporate, look at what the sort of morals would be for that episode, and then kind of piece it all together and add in different components as they saw fit. That's sort of how I see it.
Maybe I don't have to tease Gordon to feel important, Thomas thought to himself, and he puffed slowly home. Thomas got a little carried away with himself. It can happen to the best of us.
So those are the Thomas stories, and like Mike said, we get a lovely introduction to Thomas in the first episode and then Edward in the second. And so we're kind of learning along with Matt who these engines are, but of course, most of us who watch this show already knew these episodes by heart. So
of course.
We weren't probably surprised. I imagine some kids did learn of Thomas through this. And another interesting point is that we don't meet Schemer yet.
I was going to ask you about this because this is... I believe this is the only episode we never see Schemer.
Well, he was so popular, after I think he joined the cast in season 2, that, he was a no-brainer to have in every episode. But as far as I know, the whole cast had been hired already. So it was intentional to leave Schemer out of this episode. And my theory was, they're introducing a lot of worlds.
Right.
We got the whole station set. We've got Thomas and the island of Sodor, new engines to learn. My sense is I wonder if they were kind of piecing everything together and thinking, ooh, this is a lot to kind of show to kids. Why don't we wait for Schemer in episode 2? And then he really gets more kind of airtime. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Mike, but I was just kind of contemplating it.
I think that's really a good way to put it, is that, you're getting so much with not only the world of the station, but you're meeting Stacy and Matt, you're meeting Harry and Tanya, the jukebox band, Mr. Conductor, and the Thomas stories, and all these different things are kind of being thrown at you. Not that it's... I mean, I never felt like it was overwhelming kind of watching this episode, all these things being introduced, because again, it's always done in a gentle way with Shining Time, but I think because Brian is such a wonderful actor and he's such a big presence, I think it's really smart that they waited to introduce him. And I was trying to think about this. I'm curious if you think different, but I really don't think the episode suffers by not having Schemer involved.
I agree. I never missed him. I think I noticed probably by episode 2 that I'm like, oh, there he is. And, Schemer, I think, is still hitting his stride. Like, I think at first, and we'll talk about this more later, his character hasn't fully developed yet.
Right.
But no, I don't miss it. I like that we get to focus on all the important aspects of the station. I mean, mind you, we don't see the anything tunnel yet.
Right.
That comes later. We do get to see a few picture machine segments, which I wanted to talk about after this. But no, I do agree. I don't think it suffers.
I don't think so either. And they've got so much to do with establishing this first core group of characters that it makes sense to kind of sideline him and leave him for the next episode, because that he really does deserve his own spotlight, because he's just such a fantastic character. And speaking of characters, I actually wanted to... this is something that's kind of struck me, and I'm curious if you feel the same. But one thing I really like that they did for Tanya's introduction is, as we see in the episode earlier on, when Matt first goes to use the picture machine, the handle on it breaks, and Stacy says, oh, it just needs some glue. So they leave it. But when Tanya and Harry arrive, she goes to try and use it. Matt says the same thing, that it just needs some glue, and she goes, no, it needs a pin. And I think it's a really cool thing, because she's the granddaughter of an engineer. Obviously, she's picked up some little tricks and things like that along the way. And we kind of see it a tiny bit more with Kara starting in season 2. She's saying that obviously she wants to be an engineer like her grandpa Harry. She talks to Billy about wanting to be an engineer. It's kind of a shame that this is the only time we see that engineer side come out for Tanya, because I don't think it shows up again in season 1 from her, and it's a neat little quirk. I think it's cool that it shows that, especially for young kids, for the female audience, like, just because you're a girl, it doesn't mean you're limited in your knowledge or your ability to do anything that you want to do. Like, she can be an engineer as well as anybody. So the fact that she has this knowledge, it's something I wish they had played around with and integrated more.
That, Mike, that's such a wonderful point. And I love that you notice. I've seen this episode a million times probably, and you're noticing this, and I never put that together. It really, that must have been intentional. And it is too bad they didn't highlight that more, because I think as a character, Tanya is incredibly capable and strong-willed.
Oh, for sure.
And has lots of ideas of her own. I think as a kid, I remember watching this episode and seeing her so dressed up initially. I was like, oh, la-di-da. And I thought she was a little snobby at first. I remember thinking that. But then she has the picture machine moment, and she's really kind of getting in there, and she watches it, and she's immersing herself more in the world. And I thought, that's quite accurate. When kids go to a new place, they have their guard up. So it makes sense that she would be a little bit more like, oh, sure. She's a bit more sarcastic. You get that a bit more in the first couple episodes. And then I think as her and Matt bond as characters and as actors, you get a bit more relaxed feel to the character.
Yeah, you definitely see that change in her, and that the point you bring up about the way that she's presented in this episode with her outfit looking, a little bit more high class per se.
Oh, pristine.
I think that also is interesting then when you take into account the whole like engineer side of things, because it tells kids like, don't judge a book by its cover. This is someone who may look like they're all hoity-toity, but they've got.
Are you
going to
break into song?
Not yet.
Please do. Okay, not yet. We should say we are going to have some musical segments. I don't know if we'll be singing them, but that remains to be seen.
Yeah, I don't know if the Time to Shine musical theater is going to be a thing, but we'll see.
We'll wait for audience response,
exactly.
And then if the demand is there, we will fill it. Oh my god, yeah, that would be amazing and terrifying.
Boy, yeah.
And just on the subject of, two things. So the first being the picture machine segment.
Mm-hmm.
So we get introduced to the picture machine, as Mike said, before it's broken by Matt. We see a sort of an old cartoon, and we see a lot of these public domain cartoons in Shining Time Station. I don't know the specifics of this particular one, but one thing I thought about is that, it has the sort of women lifting up their skirts and kind of that, like, burlesque Moulin Rouge kind of style, and it made me think, well, these kinds of picture machines were originally peep shows.
That's a good point.
That was their origin, as far as the research that I've done, because when I was restoring the jukebox and looking into other arcade machines, I remember reading about that and thinking, oh my. But so I was like, oh, is that a subtle nod to the fact that like this will be a friendly kids picture machine, but in the past, it would show, I guess, more risque content for adults.
Trust Schemer to put a peep show in his arcade.
Exactly. I'm sure Stacy was sort of like, okay, Schemer,
this has got to go.
Yeah, we gotta get some new things in the picture machine. And then the second segment, we get Tanya viewing, I guess maybe along with Matt. And this, I will say, Mike, is one of my favorite musical segments of the series. It's a song called Start Where You Are, and I was always moved by this song. I don't know why. There was something about the spirit. It involves this young girl who rushes excitedly to an amusement park gate, seeing that it's closed, looking all dismayed, and then all of a sudden this young boy appears out of nowhere with a fancy outfit and a cane and sort of invites her in, and the whole amusement park comes alive, I would say, with her imagination and creativity. And then at the end, you see her waltzing away from this closed amusement park, and she throws her cap up in the air in this like beautiful sort of finale. And I remember, as I'm describing it, I'm getting like goosebumps. But as a kid, I don't know why that song made an impression on me. And interestingly, this is the only primetime Emmy that the show ever won, was for this song.
Really?
Really, really. So it won quite a few daytime Emmys, but this was the one and only primetime Emmy. It went to Larry Grossman, who did the music and lyrics.
Right.
And I think one other female writer that I can't recall the name of.
Wow.
So off to a great start, I would say, Shining Time Station with an Emmy award. That's pretty impressive.
That's nothing to sneeze at.
Hiding's only half of playing hide and seek. Gotta go and look to find what's true. Start where you are. Take a magic breath, touch hands. Now you're touching magic lands, and the journey's never far. 'Cause things are stirring, fizzing, whirring, whizzing, beating, darting, meeting, parting, starting wherever you are.
What are your impressions of the picture machine initially?
The picture machine, I mean, in general, it was always a very it was a grab bag. You never really knew what you were going to get with the picture machine. Sometimes it was like an old-timey cartoon, sometimes it was a fully fleshed out, live action thing. And I think that kind of added to the wonder of the whole station setting, is like, what am I going to see today in this thing? And I think this is a great way to introduce it. You know, like I mean, I've never been huge on the vocalist of the song per se, but I still really appreciate like the emotional weight of the song, because it has a good message for kids for sure. The accompanying video is very fitting for it. I say, you know, hats off to the kids who were, you know, doing the dancing and the choreography in that, because that, you know, I assume they were pretty young when that was filmed, and that's not something that is easy for young kids to nail down like that.
Absolutely. They were young. And interestingly, I remember hearing when they went to shoot the segment in the amusement park, unfortunately, the amusement park had taken all the chairs off the Ferris wheel.
Oh, no.
And the production team said, oh, hey, you know, like, come on, we got it. So they put every second one on. So if you look at the video clip, it's not a fully complete Ferris wheel, but it's partially complete, just to give the illusion. So I thought that was kind of interesting, but it's funny. You know, things you don't notice as a kid, but I agree with you, Mike. I think, you know, start where you are. It's a great first message to kids that are seeing the show for the first time. You're also seeing Matt and Tanya see the station for the first time. It's just saying, you know, embrace, even though you might be a bit scared, hesitant, not sure, embrace where you're starting from and believe in a little bit of magic. Use that imagination. You know, you're seeing a conductor that's 18 inches high pop out of a wall and tell you a Thomas story, and you're like, this is kind of weird, but I like it.
Just embrace it.
Yeah. I mean, and I think I'll just say a nod to Matt, to the lovely Jason Walliner, does a really great job with his surprise.
Yes.
Because he's, you know, in real life, he's obviously looking at a doll, a Groucho Marx doll, actually. Or a piece of tape stuck to the wall. And he does a great job of that, like, oh, okay, what's happening here?
Yeah.
And then he, you know, after his little Matthew calms down.
Oh, I love that. And then we go, or is it Matthew?
Oh, man. I have one last point on the actors. So I know that quite a few people auditioned for these roles. We had Jason Alexander of Seinfeld fame auditioning for Schemer.
Yes.
Which would have been a very, I don't know, I can't see it myself.
All I can think of is George. All I can see is George Costanza as Schemer, and it's just.
I know. Well, I remember Rick said Jason portrayed him as very miserly, and I think maybe they were looking for less of like a grumpy old man, more of like a playful, funny trickster.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's just funny to think of like the George Costanza character as Schemer, just being like, Jerry, it's stealing all my nickels, Jerry.
Man, I wish we could convince Jason Alexander to do, or I wish we could find that, you know, tape of his audition.
Oh my god, that would be incredible.
It would be incredible. I know that when Rick saw, you know, Brian audition with the kids, he said the kids could not contain their laughter. He said at first he thought they were being silent because they weren't laughing at him, but it was because they were trying to suppress their giggles as Schemer was delivering his lines. So I think from the get-go it was chemistry.
Yes, absolutely.
And we had Carole King as well audition for Stacy.
Really?
Really.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. As well as another Carol that I can't remember the name of, but some quite well-known actors. But again, Rick said with Dee Dee, the second that she walked out, they knew she had the part. She just had that sweet, nurturing, warm personality, and it really shines through.
I can't picture anyone but Dee Dee Conn being Stacey Jones.
Oh, I have such deep love for Dee Dee Conn. I would just say she is such a kind, warm person in real life as well, just in the interactions I've had with her, and it comes across on screen.
Oh, just from watching your other podcasts with her involved, she's such a sweetheart.
Oh, I can't. I want her to be my adoptive grandmother.
I think we all did.
Well, at first I wanted her to be my mom, but since my grandparents have sadly passed away, and most recently the grandma who recorded Shining Time Station for me and who got to see my restoration of the jukebox and the podcast adventure kind of before she passed away, which meant a lot to me. But I really want her to be my surrogate grandmother at this point. She just, and you know, it's genuine. you can see she's genuine, and she was also the most seasoned actor, and I think it shows in her ease in front of the camera.
Yeah, I agree. She's just such a natural at the role.
Yeah, a lot to say, and I know we've already said a lot about the first episode, but it's I think that's because we're introduced to this whole new world.
Exactly.
There's a lot of components, and we're left with that sort of magical. There's something about this place, and then we're waiting for the next episode.
Mm-hmm. We really are.
The following is a paid advertisement for Schemer's Arcade.
Schemer, 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 Schemer's Arcade. Come on down to Schemer's Arcade.
That's right, kids. Schemer wants all of you to come right down to his world-famous arcade, located in the left-hand corner of Shining Time Station. And don't forget what Schemer always says.
Spend your nickel, spend your nickel, spend them today. Spend your nickel, spend your nickel, and just go away. Schemer, 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 schemer.
That's right, kids. It's games, 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 games at Schemer's Arcade.
You really oughta come on down to Schemer's Arcade.
Hi, I'm Mike O'Donnell, one of the composers of the original Thomas the Tank Engine theme, and I'm here to tell you that I have released a selection of re-recorded themes and songs from the classic shows in a series of albums called the Engine Themes. These albums include a variety of classic themes and songs from the original TV series, as well as a few new compositions. You can purchase these albums on CD or digital download, as well as posters and pin badges. Have a look online at modmusic.co.uk. And for a special offer for Right On Track listeners, you can use the special code ROT20 for a 20% discount on all digital downloads. Be sure to enter the code when making your purchase. Thank you for your support and happy listening. Take care and stay safe.
Okay, so we're going to dive into our next episode here, and I'm going to ask our lovely Mike to introduce it. It's episode 6 of Series 1.
That is correct. Episode 6, Faith, Hope, and Anxiety. Very, very heavy title for a kid's show, isn't it, Adrian?
It's a little intense. I'm a bit anxious just even hearing you say it, but we'll bravely dive in.
It's all good. It turns out well in the end, I promise. The gist of this episode is that Matt and Tanya are very excited because Harry is going to take them on a fishing trip. Unfortunately, just before they are due to depart, Stacy arrives at the station and lets Harry know that there is a broken signal and that the Fireball Express will not be able to get through unless it is fixed. Therefore, Harry has to make the tough decision to postpone the fishing trip, much to the dismay of the kids, because, as we know, work comes before play. And the kids spend the most part of the episode here just trying to fill the time, seeing if there's anything they can do to help Harry in order to go fishing, seeing if Stacy or even Mr. Conductor can take them fishing, which I think would have been a very funny visual. And of course, Schemer comes in for his usual bit of being Schemer, which we love. Mr. Conductor, of course, tries to help the kids by telling them a couple fantastic stories about Thomas on his branch line. And of course, we get the classic jukebox puppet band, along with some interesting things here. We get the picture machine, and we also get... I don't know how to dub this one, Adrian, because Mr. Conductor, in later seasons, they had the magic bubble. But here, yes, Mr. Conductor introduces a little animated section, with just kind of by waving his fingers.
It just happens.
Exactly. Just like things do with Mr. Conductor.
How do you know what can happen? Watch. I'm going to send a train right through your imaginations.
in all, I really like this episode. I think it's simple, but it also highlights such a good thing about Harry's character. I really this makes me sad that I didn't get to see season 1 as a kid, because Harry is just such a perfect, it's a good contrast to Billy Two Feathers, who would come later, because Billy was sort of like he had more of like a father / like cool uncle, like the one that you wanted to be growing up. Totally. Whereas with Harry, he's such a perfect grandfather figure.
I agree. And in this episode, he's very straightforward with the kids. He just in the way I think a grandfather would be. And I think, we often do see Harry's stricter side. We know that he had a bit of a grumpy grandpa persona at times in the show, and apparently on set as well. But, I agree. I think this does really highlight Harry's character well, because he knows that he has to put his job first, and he also knows he's going to disappoint the kids, but I think he also has a sense that it's going to work out. And then we get to see the kids really experience that childlike disappointment of, I can't do this, my world is coming to an end.
Exactly.
Like, all they've got on their brain that day is fishing, I imagine. And the fact that they can't do it, they're like, well, I may as well just die. I mean, and that, I think, as how dramatic kids are and how singularly focused they are, that is very well captured in this episode.
Mm-hmm. I agree. It's done in such a wonderful way. And again, I think that helps to highlight the contrast between Harry's character and Billy's, because I feel like if Billy was in this episode, he would have given the kids, a very comforting message and try and sort of soothe their hurt. Whereas Harry is just saying, nope, it's work before play, kids. We have to get this done, or a lot of people are going to be disappointed and stuck.
Yeah, I was gonna say dead, but I think your phrasing is a lot gentler. Train collision.
It's gonna be a mess, kids.
Don't look. Yes. So we get a really good glimpse at Harry, and I also read on the wiki that this is the first episode of season 1 not to feature guest stars.
It is,
which I don't think it needs.
No,
honestly, we've got Harry coming and going. And really tending to his railroad duties, and just to dovetail on what you were saying about Billy Two Feathers, we do get to see Billy being an active engineer, but I feel like we get to see Harry being more of a really kind of gritty engineer.
Absolutely,
like he's repairing a signal. He's carrying the signal in his hand. I just feel like they emphasize that more in the first season.
They definitely did. I feel like you see. As much as you see Billy in his workshop, I feel like you see Harry often doing more railroad engineer things or
manual labor.
Exactly. Yeah. You see him more active around the workbench, as opposed to, when Billy would just kind of be sitting at the desk and conversing with the kids,
Let me tell you a story.
Exactly. Yeah. Not that Billy didn't have important things to say, because he definitely did, but you definitely see Harry more active in the engineer role for sure. So let's dive into this a little bit more here. So from your memory, from, your own personal takes on the episode, what do you think of this one?
Well, it was a favorite as a kid. I mean, like I said, I love all of Shining Time Station, so it's sometimes hard to pick favorites. But this episode did stand out to me. And one particular memory I want to share that, I don't know, it's really stuck with me. So I remember being very taken by the scene when Tanya opens a letter from her friend, and it has that beautiful picture. And, Stacy says, do you guys think you could do something like that? And the kids say, I don't know. And then she brings out the paper, and this beautiful music starts. And then we see the camera panning in on Matt and Tanya on the floor of the arcade, coloring, being kids. And I loved that segment. The music, again, like, as I recall it now, it could probably still make me tear up. It just had this emotionality to it and sweetness to it. And I loved seeing the kids getting creative. And I have this really early memory because my parents divorced when I was quite young.
Right.
And I remember at one point my mom sent me to, I would say kind of a group therapy for kids kind of thing. And there was this one segment where we got to do art. And I remember sitting there and I drew the fish that Tanya drew. I tried my best to use the same colors and that stripe on it and everything. And so as a kid, there was something that touched me about that segment, and I think it speaks to how Shining Time Station speaks to kids' heart. Like I know sometimes people will say, it could be sappy or saccharine, but I was a very sensitive kid, and so scenes like that I just honed right in on.
Absolutely, and you make a good point about the music too. I really have to give credit to Paul Mason, who did the score for season 1. He came up with some really beautiful themes and motifs, and that is definitely highlighted here in this moment.
Absolutely. Do you have any particular memories of it, watching it, when you're, mind you, I was going to say when you were younger, more recently, did anything in particular stand out?
Well, I mean, there's a few standout moments here for me. I like the whole episode. I really like, I feel like Harry isn't meant to be a humorous character per se, but it's the fact that when the kids are like, what can we do to help you? And he very seriously asks, do either of you have a number 3 hex key?
No.
I love that. He's like, well, thanks anyway.
It's great.
It's so great. Good. It's those subtle moments of humor where he's not intending to actually be funny that really just make it. Obviously we have to talk about Schemer. I adore the section where Schemer is trying to get the kids to make him draw a certain season. And he's giving all the reasons why he can't do everything but winter.
I know, and they're suggesting fall, summer, and he's just like, no.
It's too hot. No, there's too many colors.
Oh, well played.
Oh, it's so good. That will always crack me up for sure.
Oh God.
And of course, I mean, we have to talk about Ringo as Mr. Conductor in this, especially in the first part where he literally appears out of the package that he has shipped himself in to test the efficiency of the mail train. It's just such a charming little moment. And the thing that I really love about Ringo versus George as Mr. Conductor is that even when he's trying to do his more humorous moments, there's still such a dryness to Ringo. Yeah. And it just makes it so much funnier to watch, and the delivery of it is always so good.
Oh, he's great. I love the part at the end where he says, you better cheer up or I'm going to sit in this box and mail myself to Kulalagumba. And they're like, where's that? He's like, well, I have no idea, but I'm sure the kids there are cheering.
Exactly.
And it's funny, and you've got the little detail even, I don't know if you froze the frame and you can see that they actually wrote on top of the box to Matt and Tanya, Shining Time Station, Indian Valley, on the address. And the little touches like that, including what you said, that him being, I'm informing you the mail train is very bumpy. It makes you think there are trains. It's just another element of realism.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, of course, the best bit being when they ask him what he's going to have for lunch and he goes, a whole shrimp.
Oh my God. Sorry, just even hearing you say it, it's the cutest thing.
It's so cute. You gotta love it.
This little Mr. C with his little knife and fork.
And his bib, he puts his bib on.
I forgot about that.
Oh, bless you, Ringo. We really you gave us so much with your Mr. Conductor performance.
He did, and he had fun. You can tell he had fun. I think maybe he had fun in spite of himself. I don't really know what he thought he was getting into at first, but he really connected with the cast from what I've heard. And, he would often ask them to throw him lines and stuff because actually it was interesting in this first season, unlike when George came, they actually shot a lot of the live action station segments along with Ringo, whereas that was teased out in seasons 2 and 3, and George shot all his green screen after the main station set had been filmed, preceded by all the puppets segments. So I think it's interesting. We get, Ringo, I think, really warmed to a lot of the actors, and I think had a lot of fun with the role. I get the impression,
I get the impression that he had definitely a lot of fun on set, but you can also tell he had so much fun in the promotional moments for the show when he was doing TV interviews or anything like that. You can tell he was just I get it. I'm an 18-inch little man in this TV show, but, like, it's a blast.
Yeah. And what was his tagline? He said in every single interview. Do you remember?
Oh my, I'm blanking.
I love kids. I used to be one.
That's it.
Literally every single interview. And I was like, oh, Ringo.
He's got to have one little zinger in his pocket, right?
He does, and he also said, he's like, it's making, it's winning me a whole new generation of fans.
Yes.
These young kids who are seeing me as Mr. Conductor and not as, Ringo, Beatles, oh my God.
Exactly. Such an amazing performance, really.
It is, and I think, if he hadn't been touring, I think he might have continued.
Yeah, I wonder about that.
Because he did the Christmas special, which was in Toronto. It's the first time the whole set and everything was shipped up here, and he was still having fun with it. But I think he did want to tour, and he'd recently, gotten sober, which I think was another big component. They talk about it in his autobiography. He was, he got sober actually just after the filming of the first season, when they were just about to start the press tour. And, some people would ask questions about that and whatnot. But I really think, I think he worked hard to heal, and he's a human being. I guess it's a sensitive topic for me. I'll just say, because I know a lot of folks in the fandom make jokes about Ringo's alcoholism, but as somebody who works with a lot of folks with addiction, I just have a lot of respect for him.
Yes.
And his, how he's transparent about his recovery that he did with his wife Barbara, and I think he had a lot of integrity. I know folks in interviews would ask him. There was this one reporter who was really harping on it. They'd say, oh, Ringo doing a kid's show, whatever. And one of the parents of the kids, I believe it was Jason's mother, spoke up and says, excuse me, what does this have to do with this kid's show? And I think they really stuck by him.
Yeah, and you know what? You hit the nail on the head, especially when you're dealing with something like addiction or what have you. It's something that is very hard to overcome, and the journey is a different thing for a lot of people. So kudos to Ringo for obviously getting through that and getting past it, because it's not easy to do. So good for him.
Good for him. And I know it's a bit off topic, but it does often come up when people talk about this show.
Yes, absolutely. And you know what? I feel like because I think it was talked about that it was something that obviously George did to kind of get away from his previous persona of being the crazy, swearing, angry comedian, to show a different side of him. Yes. So I feel like the show has been sort of a savior for a lot of the actors involved in different ways.
Really well said, Mike. Yeah, I would agree.
Absolutely. Now, before we dive into the next part of this, I have to add, because you had your little trivia, but I also have a little bit of trivia about this episode.
Okay.
Actually, not trivia, but more of a fun little goof. So, since you blew my mind about the missing seats in the Ferris wheel of Start Where You Are in the first episode, in this episode, when Stacy is talking to the kids just before she tells them that there's a package waiting for them, when she sits down on the arcade steps, you can actually see, if you pause it at the right moment, you can see a boom mic come into shot.
Yes. I never saw it. I just actually read it on the wiki, but I didn't know. I never saw it as a kid.
Yeah, I remember seeing it when I was watching the episode. I was like, what was that?
Really? You're like, pause, rewind.
Yeah, I just happened to catch it. I was like, that doesn't seem like it was meant to be in the shot, but whatever. They didn't have to do a retake. It was totally fine.
The occasional boom mic. But no, it's interesting. It's interesting what you notice, especially as an adult,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's your adult eyes pick up on a lot of different things that otherwise your kid mind is just like, whatever. I don't care. This show is amazing. Yeah. They can have as many goofs in it as they want.
Now, what was your perspective on the Thomas stories in Faith, Hope, and Anxiety?
Oh, well, I really love all of Series 1. It's just such a very comfortable era of Thomas for me.
Has my heart.
But these stories in particular, it's funny because I feel like the consensus amongst a majority of the fandom is that, these ones are sort of the less interesting stories. Thomas and the Conductor in particular kind of tends to come up again and again. Personally, I really like this story. I'm a sucker for any story that involves, Thomas, Annie, and Clarabelle on the branch line. But I think the way that they integrated this story into the Shining Time plot is also, like, very clever, because Ringo just goes, "Oh, so you've been left behind at the station, have you? Funny you should mention that." And then they go into the story about a conductor being left behind.
That very thing happened to a conductor friend of mine. It's a great segue.
It really is, and it's it's nice that it's a more comforting story. It's very easygoing in comparison to other stories that would involve crashes or something like that. It's something to kind of comfort the kids in their moment of being down about not being able to go fishing. So that's a very wise choice. And then, of course, it seems like a no-brainer that the episode about fishing involves the story Thomas Goes Fishing.
How could it not?
How could it not? It would be a huge missed opportunity if they didn't go for that. So,
absolutely.
Yes, I adore both of these stories. I have such fond memories of them, and they're just so memorable in their own right.
They're lovely. They're lovely. And I kudos to the writers for choosing Thomas and the guard first or Thomas and the conductor, because it's not the fishing story first.
Correct.
So great. It's not the obvious choice right away. I will say of the two, I do prefer Thomas Goes Fishing, just because I feel like as a kid, I think it had more action for me in it. But I also really enjoy Thomas and the conductor, and that's what it's called, right, Mike?
American title, yes, Thomas and the Conductor.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm just so not used to saying it. Thomas and the Conductor. I love the scene between Thomas and Henry, where he teases him. I've always liked that, and the whole thing with the conductor running behind, and that beautiful shot of them pulling into Farquhar at the end is lovely. And Thomas Goes Fishing is just a classic, so no brainer on that one.
You know what? It's a good point, too, that, again, this is at the point where they're sticking to the sequential order of the episodes of Thomas. So they're, they very well could have just swapped it around and done Thomas Goes Fishing first, but they had the restraint to, stick with the order of the episodes. We'll work our way around it. It's not a big deal if we don't get to the fishing episode first. I really appreciate that about, how they made it all work in the end. Yeah. So that was fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We also have a few songs to talk about in this episode.
Absolutely.
The first one we see being from the Picture Machine. This is the Kite Song. That is sung, of course, by Kevin Roth, who many of you will also recognize the voice as the man who sings the opening theme song.
Yes.
Yes, indeed. What did you think of this one, Adrian?
Oh, it's one of my favorites. Again, it really moved me as a kid. Watching it, I don't know what it was about it. The longing, losing something, chasing it, finding it. The visuals, especially at the end when he's kind of climbing what looks like down a mountain and the kite's fluttering in the wind. I just have really vivid memories of that. I love the song. Shout out to Kevin Roth, wonderful guy. He did a beautiful, beautiful version of the theme song, and he wrote songs for the show. So these are all written by him, and I assume the producers would give him sort of a theme on what to write
Makes sense.
But I like the lyrics. I like the melody. I was always moved by the ending. It's hopeful.
Yes.
It ends on a hopeful note, I feel.
Yes, it definitely is hopeful, and I think Kevin Roth has such a beautiful, calming, soothing voice. It's the perfect fit for a show like this.
Like Velvet.
Like Velvet, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know what? They always had really neat things to accompany his voice as well. Like the video always would go super well with the song that he composed.
It did, and they had a second unit for that in the second and third series. I assume in the first, so they'd be filming these while they were doing the main set. So it's kind of interesting to know, and a great job overall, and captures that sort of I'm disappointed, but I'm gonna kind of see it through, and then it pays off in the end with this child finding the mother lode of kites in the forest. I remember as a kid, I'm like, and apparently they got them all from a local kite store.
That's amazing. Give back to the community.
Segment. I know, I love it. So they just kind of borrowed them, strung them all up in the tree, and then had to they rigged a special kite for the kite that was running away
right.
in all the segments where he's chasing it. But lovely job.
Yes, very lovely song. And then, of course, as per usual for Shining Time Station, we have the Jukebox Band singing the Wabash Cannonball.
How about the Wabash
Cannonball!
Again, sung by Grace the Bass, Vanessa Thomas.
Yes.
Just phenomenal voice.
Beautiful job. And a bop of a song, I will say that. There's something about the bump, 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 bump that it gets me every time. Like, it makes me want to rock out. I don't know about you, Mike.
You know what? I always really liked that before the song starts, the puppet band's talking about how they want to play something fast so that, Schemer can't get mad because they're playing without being paid. But then I think they mean fast as in, like, it's a short song. Because I always found it funny that they wanted to play a fast song, but then they go into this, like, pretty mid-tempo bop, But it's a fantastic song. And, I really like that they pretty consistently... I feel like they deviated a little bit more in their subject material in Series 2 and 3, but Season 1 in particular, they really clung hard to, like, we're going to make this band sing railroad songs, and it just, it fits every time. It's so good.
Absolutely.
where the rippling waters fall. No chances can be taken on the Wabash Cannonball. On the Wabash Cannonball. We're going right in on the Wabash Cannonball. On the Wabash Cannonball. Oh yeah, on the Wabash Cannonball. We're going right.
Yo, stop playing in there!
Great song. I love the introduction when they're like, the Wabash Cannonball.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. It just, like, gets you into it. So those little intros, and the way Grace is singing, it's so soulful. And then also, which we didn't see in the first Jukebox Band song, we get engine clips.
Yes.
We get to see a lovely big old locomotive, which I'm not sure. Somebody could probably say which one it is, puffing through. We probably see a couple different ones, and it's just, it's exciting. As obviously a lot of us here love trains, love steam engines, and we get to see that paired with just a good kind of soulful, like you said, mid-tempo song.
Exactly. Yeah, and you know what? It's funny because I feel like it's such a Shining Time Station is such a good gateway to getting kids interested in trains more in depth. Like you don't, as you said, I couldn't tell you what the specific locomotive is that they're showing in this song, but you see that and you're just kind of in awe of this huge machine with smoke billowing out of the top, and it's coming fast down the track and
majestic.
Exactly. Like you don't need to know the specifics of it. You see that, and it's just a very powerful thing.
Agreed. And I must say, this is probably one of my favorite endings to an episode of the entire series. We get a great segue with Schemer going, hey, I forget what he's saying, but he's yelling at the jukebox, right? And then he looks around and the eerie music starts to play. His whole theme of this station is haunted. And Stacy, who had been at the information desk, was, digging for something underneath. Schemer walks up with his back to the desk, and you hear Stacy going, kind of, huh, what? As Schemer is talking, and then they both turn around and scream, and it's so genuine, I feel. Like, Dee Dee looks, totally freaked, and Schemer, of course, in his classic. And then they play this sort of like do like spooky but sweet ending music, and you see Schemer kind of tripping his way out of the station. And I don't know why, but I cannot get enough of that ending. I always, as a kid, found it hilarious because you've got Schemer being his old suspicious, goofy self. You got Stacy, comfortably working at the information desk. And then when he leaves, she's still there writing. And it just, to me, it's like, oh, that like sweet presence is still there. But you got this fun little scare and goofy ending.
Yeah, and I think this is the first time that we see, because it becomes sort of a running gag in season 1 that Schemer thinks the station is haunted. I think this is the first time we see that actually come into play, where he makes that proclamation.
I think you're right.
But it's funny because, as you say, the first time, him and Stacy kind of spook each other. Whereas I can't remember which episode it's in, but the next time it comes up, I think that's when Stacy actually scares him on purpose. So it's kind of funny to see that transition of, like, the first time it was an accident, but now it's like, okay, we're gonna get him.
Oh yeah. This place is haunted. Just get the feeling. This place is haunted.
What?
I said this. Ah!
What? Oh. Schemer.
She sneaks up behind him. I remember. I don't remember what episode it is, but she sneaks up, and they all laugh and high five. And I wonder if, sort of, as they were filming this, they saw again the great chemistry between Dee Dee and Brian and how comical it was. And so then they're like, "Oh my gosh!" When Stacy realizes that Schemer is a bit of a scaredy cat, I mean, she had, I think, probably. Well, I guess they both had a reason to be scared at the end of this, but I think she's sort of like, "Haha." Now I know, and that riff carries on until I think it reaches its height at Things That Go Gahuga in the Night, which is probably another one of my favorite episodes of the first season, which we'll come to at some point. Really funny, and I think sort of rides the wave of Schemer's goofiness from, like you said, you love the sort of winter, it's a snowstorm. And then actually, to be honest, what kills me about that is right after when he does the self-portrait, and he asks them... He says, "Hey, self-portrait, does it look like me?" No, not really. No, not the eyes. And their deadpan about asking that makes me laugh.
Yes, absolutely.
Hey, self-portrait, does it look like me?
No, not really.
It doesn't? A little bit, though. Doesn't it think right in here? The nose?
Brian, I love you. I think as an actor, he is very underrated in general, and he should have been in more shows.
Oh, 100%. I think the fact that he didn't get picked up for more after Shining Time ended is a huge disservice to his talent.
It doesn't make sense to me, because Schemer was... I mean, he was so popular, he was doing personal appearances.
Yes, exactly. The fact that he could carry an entire meet and greet on his own is a pretty big testament to how well loved the Schemer character really was.
No, absolutely. Any other kind of key points to this episode that stuck out in your mind, Mike?
Really, again, I'm going to circle back to it, but I think this is, as much as he kind of only shows up mainly at the start and end of the episode, I think it is such a good episode for Harry, because it shows you that he's a no-nonsense railroad engineer kind of guy. He knows that the work has to be done. But I feel like the ending is so sweet when, he comes along and the kids are just all down thinking they're never going to go fishing. And they're saying that, they've missed the last train. And he goes, "Oh, really? Well, then what do you call that?" And you hear the train whistle. and you find out he's fixed it and coordinated it so that not only can the signal be fixed, but they can also go fishing afterwards. So it's just
the Fireball
amazing.
Express isn't going anywhere without this.
It's so sweet.
Great finale.
I really like, the Harry-centric episodes, as few of them as there are, they are definitely some of my favorites of season 1, and this is no exception.
Yes. I find his character quite moving, actually, a lot of the time.
Yes.
And especially in his birthday episode, which is, I think, one of my favorites. But I hadn't thought about it that way, but I agree. I like when Harry is the focus, because he's a really good, not foil for Stacy, but he's a good counterbalance to Stacy's sweetness and overexcitement at times. He really brings it down to, like, okay, what are we working with here? Did you write that down? Is this done? I think it was a good choice.
Yeah, and I mean, you see it more in, I believe it's in Mapping It Out, when they're talking about, Stacy and Harry are kind of having the back and forth about, how they're going to quote unquote discipline the kids when they get back. Yes. But it's such a good way of representing, I guess different styles of parenting. Like, Harry is a little bit more strict, and he's, obviously it comes from a place of concern that he's, wanting to, instill the lesson that you don't just go running off without telling someone. Stacy's trying to approach it very gently, and I think it's presented in such a great way that it's like they are both coming from a place of love. Just because one isn't gentle doesn't mean that this person doesn't love you and have your best interest at heart.
No, beautifully said, Mike, because you have to have both, when you're disciplining children. We've got Stacy with her sort of heartfelt, we were so worried about you. And then she also cuts in with, you shouldn't go anywhere without asking permission. Mm-hmm. And that's a clear guideline. Like, don't do this again, because this is dangerous. Getting on a train and going with somebody else. I know we're talking about another episode here, but yeah, it works. And then you've got both sides that are equally valid.
Yes, exactly.
And either one without the other would be, okay, but not great. You'd get maybe Tanya being overly disciplined, or Matt being not coddled, but yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And that's really why I love the dynamic of Harry and Stacy, because it just works so well.
Yes, so completely agree.
Anything else about this episode you wanted to add?
I don't think so. I did realize, Mike, that we forgot to do ratings on the first one.
So, goodness.
So, gosh darn it. So why don't we do ratings for this one and then loop back to A Place Unlike Any Other?
Absolutely. What would you rate this one as?
So I would give it either an 8 or an 8.5. Mm-hmm. I really enjoy this episode. Like I said, I love the music. I think is a standout. Paul Mason, lovely instrumentals.
Absolutely.
And that's an instrumental that kind of sticks throughout series 1 especially. Great, I think, good pacing, great use of the picture machine, great ending. I think as a kid find some of the we're never going to get to go fishing repetitive, but in a way that's realistic. Kids are whiny like that. When they're going to do something, it's the end of the world, and then they're going to keep complaining and be all like, "Oh, like what are we going to do now?" So I think as a kid, that's maybe why my rating's a bit lower. I was sort of like, "Okay, we get it. Like you're sad you don't get to go fishing. Like shut up already." To be perfectly frank, but as far as an episode goes and the choice of stories, the flow of the characters, solid, really solid. What about you, Mike?
I think I would feel comfortable giving this a pretty solid 8. I think overall it's a really fantastic episode. Again, I love the characterization of Harry. I love the lesson that it teaches. I love the Thomas stories that it's chosen. Obviously, it works very well within the grand scheme of the episode.
Yes.
I would agree. I think the pacing is what throws it a bit for me, because I think when you look at other Shining Time Station episodes, they do a better job of spacing out when the Thomas stories are told. Whereas with this one, it feels very quick. It feels like you get Thomas and the conductor, then immediately following that is the picture machine, and then immediately following that is Thomas Goes Fishing.
Yeah.
So it's very front heavy.
Do you think they crammed in too much, or they just sort of redistributed it overall in the sort of half hour, whatever, 22 minutes better?
Yeah, I think other episodes definitely distributed the content a little bit better. I think it had a little bit more breathing room. Because again, after you get past, Thomas Goes Fishing, there's still a lot of the episode left. And thank goodness that we have, obviously Brian's bit as schemer, the ending bit with Harry explaining how they're still going to get to go fishing, and then of course the jukebox band to kind of carry us home. But yeah, I think it's a bit strange, especially when you think about people who might only be watching Shining Time for the Thomas episodes. It's kind of like a 1-2 punch with this one. So, I definitely would not say to anyone, stop watching after the Thomas episodes, because it's very much still an entertaining thing afterwards. But, I think the other episodes of Series 1 definitely did a better job of, let's put the first story in like the first, 5 or 6 minutes, and then we'll save the second story for about 10 minutes or so down the road. So that's really my only sticking point with this one, but definitely a solid 8.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. And just another shout out to the ending. It's really hard to describe in words, but when I watched it as a kid, it just felt I don't know, when I visualize watching the end of the episode, it just feels so familiar. It makes me think of like somewhere I know, people I know, like a summer afternoon. The kids have kind of gone off fishing with Harry. They have a funny little scare moment, and then Schemer trots off, and Stacy's there at the desk doing her thing. It's just, it's so, again, hard for me to put into words, but it has a comfort and a familiarity that I just would go back to because it felt like a family. It felt just good.
100%.
Just felt good.
I agree.
Yeah. And we'll loop back to our lovely opening episode, Place Unlike Any Other. So, Mike, what would you give this lovely opener?
I think I would have to give this one, I'm going to say a 7.5. Because, again, I do love it. I think it does a fantastic job of being an introductory episode. It's definitely not as action heavy. It's very much about the series finding its footing, which I think was necessary. They had to do it this way in order to get kids familiar with the world, familiar with the characters, all aspects of the station, and of course, it's about introducing the wonderful world of Thomas and all his friends. So I appreciate that they had a bit more restraint with this one to take it slow. Again, not introducing Schemer right off the hop, because I think that would have been a total sensory overload for a lot of kids.
Great.
But yeah, I think it's a very solid way to start off the series, and it definitely gets better as you go along, but the first episode is not anything to sneeze at either.
Absolutely. I'm going to go a little bit higher. I really love this episode. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10.
Wow. Okay.
Give it an A+ on my end. I feel like it really welcomes everyone to the world of the station. You really get a feel for the set and the way the set is a character in and of itself. We get a lovely sort of panning shot of the whole mural with all the sound effects. We get to meet sort of we get to see all the different arcade machines, see how the ticket desk works, and it just, there's something about the way it establishes the lore of the station. The fact that it's incredibly old, it has this history way beforehand with Stacy's grandmother, her connection to it, and obviously she has a really deep investment in revitalizing this station, restoring it to its former glory. And I think, interestingly, like sort of, my journey with restoring the jukebox and bringing it back, I think maybe I haven't thought about it until this point, till this moment, but it is kind of that, appreciation of old things.
Yes.
And wanting to still value them and value their beauty. I think that's what really ropes me into this episode. Your points are all totally valid, and I wouldn't give it a 10. I think maybe because it's not entirely Shining Time Station without Schemer for me. Even though I agree it would have been sensory overload, and it is slower paced. But to me, I love the music, I love the pacing, and I love the way that the actual set is center stage in this episode. So shout out to Wayne White, who was the set designer in the first series, really established the look of the station, and actually designed and colored all the Jukebox Band sketches as well. So he was really instrumental in establishing that look, and I think it works.
It absolutely does. I really cannot picture the setting of Shining Time Station being anything else than what it is. They did a fantastic job. They nailed it right from the get-go.
Yeah. And I mean, think about it. It's the same guy who did Pee-wee's Playhouse, which is a show I never watched as a kid. Very different kind of set.
Very different.
But just love it.
What can you not love?
Hi, I'm Ken Bianco Jr. from Train World, where we have the greatest selection of model trains and train sets. We also are proud to carry Bachmann's full line of Thomas & Friends products. With a large variety of different brands and scales, we have the best items for your model train collection. You can find Train World on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram, where you can see our latest products and even be invited to all our events like Thomas Tuesdays. Visit trainworld.com today to find your next addition to your model railroad journey.
It's so fun talking about it with you, Mike, because it's just like, hearing your joy and also kind of discovering things that are going to pop up for us along the way too. I think.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, this is a joy to do it with you too, because obviously you have so much involvement in the Shining Time world with your other podcast and the jukebox restoration and all these other neat things. So it's fun. It's fun to just go back and revisit this series that really means so much and shaped childhood.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, another thing we've been talking about, we'd love to incorporate some special guests as we go along.
Yes, for sure.
There's a lot of folks that would be, I think, very keen to come on the show and recall some of their memories for our lovely listeners out there. So please spread the word and let us know your feedback. Let us know what you think of the episodes, what you liked, what you didn't like so much, maybe things that we missed. We'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. We value any and all feedback here.
Yes. And it's just been a joy. So I'd like to thank you, Mike, for coming along this journey.
Oh, and thank you. I'm glad that we get to do this, and I'm definitely looking forward to doing some more.
Yes, me too. And thank you to Tom as well, who is here but not with us at the moment. So thank you to Tom and his enthusiasm for this show, which he also discovered in later years.
Bless you, Tom. We you may have shown our friends your Thomas the Tank channel, but we have shown you the Shining Time channel.
Well said.
And we hope you think it's quite good.
Yeah, right. Hopefully we've given you your time to shine today as well. And thank you, everyone in Listenerland, for joining us. I have been Adrian.
I have been Mike.
And we will see you hopefully very soon for the next episode of our little podcast.
See you soon, everybody.
Bye.